In this video, I'll be talking to you guys about the master cylinder and showing you an example of how it may fail. This is, again, the 63 Rambler American, 63. And what happened was, I've had this car for about a few years now. I'm going to say maybe 5. I'm not sure. I sort of get lost in time. But I've had it for about 5 years. And anyways, maybe more than that. But anyways, I have never checked. I haven't never really thoroughly checked the master cylinder. Although, of course, I do check all the pipes. I tend to check it every year. And I have done so. And more importantly, I checked the handbrakes. So the first thing I should probably say is that with working handbrakes, or sometimes actually foot brakes, with mechanically activated safety brakes, you can have, at least me, I can have complete peace of mind. So why? Because even if the brakes, and I always tell this to people, the most vital component in the car in terms of safety is the brakes. If an engine fails, you lose the engine. If the battery dies, the car will stop driving. You get a tow. If the transmission breaks, the car again will just stop moving. But if the brakes fail, oh boy, then you have a real problem in your hands. And I have talked to people, I have serviced cars that there was completely no brakes. The handbrakes, the cables were completely rotted out, and the person ran out of brakes. That was a very, very dangerous situation. But as long as you have handbrakes, mechanical brakes that are working, you will be able to stop the car. Although if you, depending on your driving habits, if you drive aggressively and very close behind other vehicles, you may not be able to stop in time. And the reason being is that the handbrakes, they only activate the rear brakes. So you only have 50% of your braking power. So for people that are used to you're driving closely behind other vehicles, then if they're used to driving close to other vehicles, then they might not be able to stop in time, right? So that being said, I would like to have a vehicle where the handbrakes, you could activate all 4 wheel cylinders, all 4 brakes, right? I honestly don't know why that's not standard, or there are cars like that. So again, people sometimes will quote or refer to standards of engineering, Automotive Engineers Society or whatever, or just safety tests. These are very basic. The standard pass in automotive society, in automotive shops, it's minimal. It's very, very low. The standards are very, very low. And so again, I'm always trying to improve. There's a lot of room for improvement, and I'm always trying to do that. So it would be nice, like I said, to have a car with all 4 brakes, mechanical. And again, this goes back, going back to older cars. Model A's, for example, 20s cars. They had mostly completely mechanical brakes. There was no brake lines. It was just a lever and a steel rod that pushed the brakes. So again, people say it's not really effective. You can't. It's insufficient for heavier cars, and it doesn't have as much power stoppage, stopping power, as vacuum assisted brakes. But they are very safe because a steel rod is many times thicker than a steel brake pipe. So that car, I worked on a 27 Model A, and it's literally almost 100 years old, and the brakes work fine. Still the original brakes, nobody ever serviced it, and they still work fine. Because again, it's a steel rod, it lasts that long. A steel pipe is, like I said, thinner than a steel rod. Speaking of, I'm sort of drifting away here from the basic point, but it would be nice to have a car with mechanical brakes with vacuum assist. I don't think I've personally never heard of a car that has such a thing, but it would be nice. I really would like such a thing. The advantage of brake pipes over, the mechanical brakes is that the mechanical brakes, the rods have to be straight. Because if you pull on a rod that's bent, that's not straight, it'll tend to bend it even more or straighten it out, so you lose brake power like that. And you need lots of combination levers. So the advantage of brake pipes, using pipes instead of rods, is that you can go around corners and in tight, spaces, little crevices, and they're not so, you don't need levers and moving parts and things like that, and bolts, right? And pivots. So that's one advantage. But alright, so that's that out of the way. So I haven't really fully checked the brakes in over five years. I checked that they were working, I checked that they were functioning properly, but again, it's 5 years, a lot could change in 5 years. And again, there's no telltale signs that the brakes are going to go bad if you don't actually look at the pipes. So in my case, the pipes aren't copper nickel brake lines, they're still just what was already on the car, which bothers me because I would like to get copper nickel or even possibly stainless brake lines. But all the brake lines are coated with rubberized asphalt and they're all in good condition, there's no rust anywhere. So I just sort of left it at that, but I never really fully inspected the master cylinder. I did some inspection on the wheel cylinders and they all look nice and clean in good condition. The rear ones at least, and the front ones I believe as well. But again, it's been 5 years. I don't really recall the extent of my inspection that I did 5 years ago, right? But it's, again, you see, it's most people today, they just drive the cars. They don't even know how to change oil. They don't know how to change a battery. So, I've even spoken to people that sort of got pissed off at me. Oh, I've been driving since, 1975, since before you were born. Well, yes and no. Anybody can go into a car, get inside a car and make it move. That's not really driving. The case of the client that I had that ran out of brakes, she didn't realize, she thought it was normal that the brake pedal was getting lower and lower, right? And again, they didn't know how to even check the brake fluid level, and that's very dangerous. I mean, how many people nowadays check their brake fluid? How many of them even know how to do that? I think that's a very basic thing that everybody should do, and indeed, if you've taken a driver's license test, one of the requirements is that before you drive in the car, you should walk around and check for fluid leaks. And of course, that's the theory, but how many people actually do that? Nobody does that. You just get in the car and you drive until it breaks. And I don't like that form of thinking. So for every customer that I've had so far, everybody that I've spoken with, I always like to show them one of the most important things, probably the most important thing that you should check in the car, which is the brake fluid level. But regardless of that, anyways, even, in addition to that, I should say, every year or so, especially if you live in a climate where there's snow, and therefore there's salt, You should check the full brake system, the brake pipes, at least every year. Um, at least every year, like I said, unless you have copper, nickel, or stainless brake lines, then you don't really ever have to check them. So that's sort of what I'm going. That's my ultimate objective. But like I said, I've already done a lot of work and a lot of improvements to this car. It was very, very severely abused. It was mutinized. It was butchered by whoever had it before me. So just keep that in mind, right? But anyways, finally moving forward. I finally decided, I had some spare time, and I finally decided to check the brakes. I sort of realized, it started feeling that the brakes were a bit spongy. They weren't responding as rapidly as they used to, and one of the wheels used to brake before the other. And the way you can tell that is, you hit the brakes and one of the tires screeches, right? And I started to feel a difference in braking, basically. So I decided to take off the front wheels. I also took that opportunity to grease the wheel bearings on the front. Fairly easy job. And so I looked at one of the wheel cylinders, and in the front, and what I always, the basic test, the first test, is you peel back the rubber cap, the rubber boot, and you look inside. And what happens is, over time, a bunch of rust and junk gets in there. And if you peel that out open, let's see if I have a wheel cylinder here. Give me 1 second. Here's pretty much what a wheel cylinder looks like. We're away from the light here. It's a bit dark. So that's what a wheel cylinder looks like. So in the car, you'll look at it like this. And then I like to peel this part back. And since this is a new one, as you can see, it's really nice and clean. But what happens is, a lot of these, and inside here there are 2 pistons and 2 seals and a spring right in the middle. And the spring keeps the seals tight against, against the pistons, against the cylinders. Sorry, yes, the pistons. That prevents leaks, and the seals obviously seal the oil from going out. And these rubber boots here, these rubber parts on the outside, they stop rust and garbage from getting inside. Now, the pistons on many cars are made of aluminum. And contrary to popular belief, aluminum does corrode. So in reality, it does rust, if you will. It's not really called rust, but it's the same thing. Both steel and aluminum, they do get corroded, especially with salt. So over time, these pistons inside here, they actually seize up, and then you can see a bunch of white stuff. Right, so this one is new. Let me see if I have an old one. I don't think I do, but you get the point. Right, so that's what happens, and sure enough, I opened, I took a look at it, and the one on this side, left front, there was a bunch of garbage on it, and so I decided to take that wheel cylinder off, and sure enough, it was seized. But we're back here again. can't really see me there, can you? So yeah, sure enough, it was seized. But the weirdest thing is when I hammered one of the pistons out, so only one of them was seized. And that explains why the brakes weren't working properly. So in each wheel cylinder, there are two pistons. And again, this is for drum brakes, right? This is a fully drum brake car. No disc brakes. Disc brakes, it's a slightly different story. But the same principle still applies. But on drum brakes, so in this car there's one wheel cylinder on each wheel, and on each wheel cylinder, those things there are two pistons, one on each side. And the way it works is the brake shoes are like that. They're sort of shaped like that. And then one side, each side of the piston, each side of the cylinder, each piston pushes out on those shoes, and the shoes press against the drums, which is just that round part, and that stops the car. So for each wheel cylinder, again, there's two pistons, so in total on the car, there are eight pistons. So out of those 8 pistons, over time, one of them is bound to seize up, especially if it's aluminum. I do try to check for brakes whose pistons are steel, and that lasts a lot longer. So again, it's just aluminum is very sensitive to salt, especially. Although there is that rubber boot protection, over time it seems that moisture, garbage, whatever gets inside there. For some reason, the aluminum pistons, the problem is aluminum is soft and it's very easy to scratch. So as soon as you start getting a bit of rust inside there, it scratches and then brake fluid starts to leak. So with the steel, I'd really like to have a stainless steel piston. I don't know if there is such a thing. I'd certainly like to make one, at some point, in the future. That's what's going to happen. But anyways, that's what happens. So on one side, what happens if you get one of them seized, then only half, just one shoe of the brake works, only half the brakes work, and basically there's shattering vibration. One brake shoe wears out more than the other. One side of the car stops before the other, and it pushes, it pulls, the car pulls to one side or the other. So I got that wheel cylinder out, and you can get rebuild kits for them. So what happens is you just change the seals, and some kits come with the pistons as well. That's the best option. You can change the pistons and the seals. But in my case, I just went ahead and I just bought the entire assembly of the new cylinders. So, but the weirdest thing was that one of the seals was actually missing. So right away, it wasn't corroded, there wasn't little bits of it inside. That tells me that, whoever butchered the car before me, they played around with the brakes and they forgot, or they just didn't bother to put one of the wheel seals back in. And the only reason I still had brakes was because that cylinder, that piston was seized. So that corrosion actually sort of welded the piston to the cylinder and didn't allow any leaks, surprisingly enough, right? But as soon as, if that corrosion had somehow, broken loose, then I would have simply had no brakes. I would have, been entirely at the mercy of my handbrakes. So again, whoever had it before me, they did some really stupid, deplorable things to the car. Like I said, there's a bunch of, if you haven't watched my other videos, they put foam in fenders, they put, body filler and fiberglass on structural components. They didn't put any oil in the engine at some point. They did terrible welds on many parts. So they did many silly things. to the car. And I guess, the ultimate stupidity, the ultimate stupid action was not putting a seal in one of the brakes. Again, the seal, that rubber seal, is all that's stopping that oil from leaking. And there is a pressure of about 1,000 psi on brakes at times for hard braking. And it's 1,000 psi. If there's nothing to stop, nothing to seal those two, the space between those two surfaces, then oil will just leak out. And and then that oil could possibly leak onto the brake shoes, and then that decreases your braking ability even further. So whoever did it, they really did, some very, very deplorable things to the car, like I already said. So right away, when I get a car when I get a car that has something like that, if they did something that serious, do I trust them with anything else? No, I don't. So as soon as I thought that, I decided to do a full, complete check on the brake system, and that's sort of what I'm going to do now. And sure enough, I put some more. I changed the wheel cylinders, but still, that's not enough. And sure enough, a few days later, even with the new wheel cylinders, I noticed the brake pedal getting lower and lower and more spongy. So I finally stopped the car, and indeed, as I stopped the car over here, it started to leak really, really badly. Not from the wheel cylinders, and they did a good job there, but from where the brake lines, from where the brake line joins the flexible rubber hose. So that's what I'm going to show you now, sort of. So that's the master cylinder right there. And so the way I figured the leak is I got an assistant with very, very tiny hands. And I've joked around with this before, and it would be really nice to have kids working in a garage, a mechanics shop, because they have little hands, which are very, very useful for putting bolts and things in hard to reach spots. So that's what I did. Although my assistant was not a child, just a person with very, very tiny fingers, and I just got him to follow the brake lines, one of the brake lines, and try to determine where the leak is, right? And I stepped on the brake, and they felt the oil leaking right in the junction where the rubber hose meets the steel, in this case steel pipe. And so the first thing, as soon as you start brakes, as you start losing brake fluid, most master cylinders after 1960, I believe, they all are double. They're called tandem master cylinders. So as you can see, there's two humps, and in each hump, it's just basically two cylinders put together, but they're still separate, like together in the same construction, the same casting. But one of them goes to the front, and one of them goes to the rear. So that doubles the safety, right? If there's a leak in the front, you'll still have the rear brakes, and if there's a leak in the rear, you still have the front brakes, basically. Most 40s cars, like that DeSoto, for example, there's just one. It's just a big cylinder, and if you have a leak anywhere, then all the brake fluid will leak, and you'll have no brakes whatsoever. So that also helps you diagnose where the brakes are leaking from. So you open this up, and some of them are bolted on, some of them have this sort of wire. And then you look at which side is lower on the brake fluid. So as you can see, this part here is completely empty. I've already drained it out and I've cleaned it. And this side is still full. So this means that the leak is coming from whichever pipes are coming on this side. So that narrows down your options, right? So then there's just two sides. And so it could have been, so in this case, in my case here, the front brakes are leaking. Since I replaced the cylinders, the wheel cylinders, they're brand new, I automatically assumed that the leak was on the brake line somewhere. Since I don't see any rust anywhere, that means that tells me it's at the joint, and sure enough, I got my assistant to confirm that. So what I did now is but the thing is, the weird thing here is that's happening is I still don't have any brakes whatsoever at this point. So even though this here is still full, you guys probably can't see it, but it is really dark. Yeah, you guys can see that. And brake fluid is supposed to be transparent. It looks like water. So what's happening is, although this is theoretically a double safety system, even though there isn't a leak, that portion of the cylinder still isn't working. And you'll see, I'll just go in the car and I'll pump the brakes, and the brakes are there's no resistance whatsoever. It squirted up a little bit of brake fluid there. I'll just, so theoretically I should still have half the brake system working. In this case, the rear brake's working. But there's just a small hole here where the oil goes into the actual piston down here. And if that hole is clogged or with rust or whatever, then the oil will simply not go down. And even though there's not a leak, there isn't a leak, the master cylinder still won't work. So I'll just quickly show you what the brakes look like inside. You can see we should still have brakes in the front, but I actually have no brakes except from my handbrakes. So there is no resistance whatsoever on that brake pedal. It's just going all the way down and not doing anything. See that? So for some reason oil is not going from the reservoir down to the piston and the cylinder and that master cylinder. So this is a classic example of two different problems in one. So I actually had a leak from the master cylinder. I would have had a leak in the seats from the wheel cylinder in front, and the rear brakes are completely deactivated because there's a clog or a seal problem in the master cylinder. Very, very dangerous combination if you combine that to a rusted out handbrake cable and bad driving habits. That's an accident for sure. So my procedure now will be to remove that master cylinder and either repair it or replace it. If I can, I'll replace it with just another master cylinder that I have. And then I'm going to go and check the rear brakes as well, the rear wheel cylinders.